For those of you that haven't heard yet, we introduced Davinci Resolve 15 yesterday at the show. It's our biggest upgrade ever. The big news really is the addition of Fusion visual effects and motion graphics. So Fusion has been available as a standalone application for years, and it's used on high-end feature films, television shows. It's a complete 2D and 3D visual effects and compositing application. And what we've done is we've taken that and we've added it to Davinci Resolve right down here. So right between the edit and the color pages in Davinci Resolve, you now have Fusion, which means you no longer have to import or export files or shots to go have your visual effects done. It can all be done right in the same application. So whether you're working solo or you're collaborating with a group of people, all you have to do is send Resolve project files back and forth, which are really small, and you've got the work going back and forth. So let's get started. I've got Hyperlight here, which is an independent film. And our show starts with a space pod floating in space, and our astronaut wakes up in the space pod from hypersleep, and she's a little startled because she's supposed to be in our ship and she doesn't know why the space pod has been ejected. So what we're going to do is we're going to add some visual effects here, and we're going to composite some computer graphics on the top of her visor so that she can sort of check out what's going on with the systems and everything that's happened. So adding visual effects is really, really simple. You just scrub to the frame or the scene that you want, you click on the Fusion tab, and then you're in Fusion. So no imports or exports. Like all of the pages in Resolve, you have buttons at the top that show and hide different parts of the interface. You've got your viewers at the top. If I hit the 1 key, I can load it in the viewer on the left. If I hit the 2 key, I can load it in the viewer on the right. And you've got an inspector here at the right, which is where we make all our adjustments to parameters as we start working. Now, you'll notice that Fusion is a little different than the Resolve timeline because we work with nodes instead of layers. And on the left, we've got a media in node, and that's where the image comes in from the timeline. And on the right, we have a media out node, and that's where it goes back out to the timeline. And the way that you build visual effects is it's kind of like building blocks. You take tools or effects, and you just place them in between the media in and the media out nodes. So let me give you an example of how that works. I'm going to go to my effects library, and in the effects library you'll find over 250 tools for everything from 3D to compositing, color, paint, particles, macros, matting, tracking, transformation, everything you could ever want is in here. So I'm going to grab the grid warper and I'm just going to drop it between the media in and the media out, and you can see it's now connected. I get these on-screen controls, I'm just going to make them a little smaller. I can use the inspector at the right to make adjustments, or I can use the on-screen controls. We're going to do something really silly here, and then I'm going to go back to my edit page. So you can see very quickly between editing and effects, just back and forth, and depending on the kind of effect you're doing, you may need to cache this, or it may play in real time. It just depends on the type of effect, the complexity, and the speed of your computer, of course. So let's just play through a few of those frames. So you can see there's our effect on the edit page. So that's kind of silly. Let's just delete that and go do something serious. Now I mentioned that I was going to put some graphics on her visor, so let's do that. I need to get started with this, I need another piece of media, so I'm just going to go to my media pool and access my bins. So the media pool in Davinci Resolve is where we store all the media in your project, and now it's available on the edit page, the Fusion page, the color page, and the Fairlight page. So anywhere you are in the application, you can get any piece of media that you need. In this case, I'm going to take some computer graphics that we've got, and I'm going to add that to the scene. So let me just close that up so we have more room. I'm going to hit the 1 key. The 1 key shows it in the viewer on the left. You can see the graphics there. Now to combine images, you very simply use what's called the merge tool. And the merge tool, as its name implies, has one purpose, and all it does is it composites one image on top of the other. So as soon as I connect this up, you see that it composites the graphics over her face. So very, very simple flowchart style way of working. If you wanted to add a little realism, we could defocus the computer graphics by adding a blur tool right after the graphics and before we merge it together with the background. So now I've added a blur tool. Its parameters appear on the right. You can set the parameters for your blur it as much or as little as you want. And we just want it to be slightly out of focus so that it looks like the camera's focused on her and she's looking at what's on the screen in front of her. So I could take this another step further. If I wanted to make this a little more realistic, I can add some dimension to the shot by maybe adding some reflections or glare elements here on the visor. To do that, we're going to use Fusion's paint tool. So now you have full-blown paint inside of Davinci Resolve. To paint, I need something to paint onto, so there's a background that I'm going to add, and that's what we're going to paint onto. And then there's my paint tool itself, so I'm going to connect those together. And we want to add the paint strokes on top of everything we've already done, so I'm going to put another merge here. And then we're going to add those together. Now, with the paint tool selected, I see its controls here on the right. I can go to the brush, I can set the brush size, the softness. There are different apply modes. You can do a regular paint, a clone, emboss, stretch, smears, all kinds of stuff to get the effects you want. And then there are different type of strokes. We have single strokes and multi-strokes. I'm just going to use a regular stroke. I'm going to hold down the command key to resize the brush right there on the screen. And then I'm just going to drag and paint a couple of strokes here in the corner and on the side. So obviously this doesn't look very good. We need to blend this in. I can go in and I can modify any of the strokes. These are all vector strokes. You can see that there. I can change the color if I want to. Can change any parameters. These can be animated strokes over time. But for what we're doing, I'm just going to switch back to the merge tool, and I'm going to change the blend mode from normal to overlay, and we can adjust how much of that we want to see through. So now we've got our 2D composite. So you can see very easily by looking at the node graph here, the image comes in, we merge and blur a computer graphic, we merge the paint strokes, and then we send it back out to the timeline. So this is a lot easier than using stacks of layers with filters that you have to twiddle open and search for the filters, because everything is laid out in a very logical flowchart style. And these are really like building blocks where you just combine the blocks you need to build the effects that you want. So once you wrap your head around working in this fashion as opposed to the stacked layer approach, it really becomes quite easy and is really powerful. So let's take a look at the finished effect. So there we have it. That's not too bad. So in this next shot, we're going to do a green screen key. And what you'll see here is that I've got two layers here in my timeline. I've got my green screen and I've got my planet in the background. And I want to work on both of those together. So I could do what I did previously, which was just bring one layer in at a time to Fusion, or I can bring multiple layers. So all I'm going to do is select those two layers. We're going to right click on that and we're going to create a new Fusion clip. Now when I do this, they get consolidated on my edit timeline, but I can still go back to those two original clips anytime I want if I need to do color correction or other work to them, so they're still available for me. But when I switch to the Fusion page, you'll see that because they were stacked on the timeline, Fusion already knows that these two things should be merged together, that it's a composite. So it creates the merge for me and it plugs everything in together exactly how we need it to be. So I'm going to go to my effects library, and in the matte category, I'm going to get a keyer. You can see we've got several keyers here. I'm going to choose the Delta keyer, which is our newest keyer, and it's actually a really great keyer. And with the Delta keyer selected, let me just make sure that you're seeing something here. With the Delta keyer selected, I'm going to just take my eyedrop tool and I'm going to sample that green. Oops, missed it, sorry. There we go. So now we've got the green screen composited. It's not bad, but if I go and look at the matte, you can see that I need to do a little cleanup work. So you've got full control over your matte here. There's cleanup tools so that I can make this look really, really good. I'm going to go to my final result. And the great thing about the green screen is that it's a real-time effect. So I go back to the timeline, I don't have to wait, I don't have to do anything. I just play it back, and you've got now feature film quality compositing and green screen keying right here in Davinci Resolve, along with all the paint and the other stuff that I showed you. So that's the basics of using Fusion. Let's do something a little more elaborate now. In this case, we've got her space pod floating by, and we're going to do a title sequence. So as soon as the space pod clears the frame, we're going to add some 3D animated titles and some 3D particles. Let me show you how that's done. I switched to the Fusion page where we see our composition, and let me turn my media pool off so that you see more of the image. Okay, the video is 2D, obviously, it's two-dimensional. to work in 3D, I need to put this video onto some kind of a shape. Now I have options here. I can put it onto any kind of shape that I want. So let me just grab this shape here, and we're going to disconnect this. And I'm going to connect this to a shape. Oops, sorry. There we go, let's view that. So I'm going to play that back, and we can put it on a sphere. We can put it on a torus, any object. You can see that it is animating and moving on that object. So for what we're going to do, I'm just going to use a basic image plane. There's my image plane. There's my video on the image plane. And you can see it floating by up. We're backward. Let me just spin it around the other way. Okay, so we're going to work from about this frame on. So I'm going to just set my play range to loop in about this region so that we can work. And now I'm going to add some 3D text. To add the 3D text, I just drag in the 3D text node. And you can see there it is right there. Now I need to merge these together. We're going to use a different type of merge tool. This is a 3D merge tool, which is different than the 2D one I showed you earlier. The big difference here is that I can plug as many items as I want into a 3D merge tool, so I can keep adding things to the scene. This basically becomes my 3D scene, this merge tool. Everything that lives in that scene will be in that, connected to that merge tool. So I've got my text connected to my 3D merge. Let's take a look at that. Oop. I need to view that by pressing the 2 key in the viewer so I can see that node, and there's my text in 3D. So now we're just going to style the text just like you would style pretty much any text in any other application. You select the node, you type what you want to type. You should type it without making a spelling error. And I'm going to just select my font. We're going to adjust the size. We're going to make this pretty small, actually. And then let me just spin this around so you can see it. And we're going to adjust the tracking because it's a little tight, so maybe we'll go to about there. Give it a yellowish color. Okay, so if I zoom into this, you can see that the text is still flat. I want to make that 3D, so I'm going to go to the extrusion, and I'm going to give it some depth. So we're going to make it 3D. Maybe we'll bevel the edges. This gives a little more visual interest to the edges there. And now you can see that I've got my great bevel text in 3D with my scene. So let's start animating. I'm going to go back to the text tool. Animating in Fusion is the same as animating on the edit page or on the color page. All I do is I click the keyframe button to set a value, I move the playhead, and I change the value, and I've instantly tracked the text going from wide into a tighter formation. So we're going to now do character by character based animation. I'm going to add something called a follower. And the follower basically just lets one character follow the other. And I set a delay, which is the timing between each character's animation. And we're going to animate the character's position in Z space. So around frame 140, I'm going to add my offset. And maybe around frame 88, we're going to add, we're going to make that fly past the camera. Okay, so now when I play that back, you're going to see the text flying in past the camera. All right, and I seem to have accidentally erased my keyframe for the tracking, I think. Let's just see what I've done here. In my tools. So we've got that keyframe. Okay, no, I didn't, sorry. So this is great, this is looking like we want. The animation is very mechanical right now. So we can go into our curve editor. We have full control over our animation parameters. I can select these. I can adjust the curves for any parameter. So the ease in, the ease out. We've got all different kinds of tools here. So you can ping pong, reverse animations. You can stretch, squish, retime the animation parameters. It's a really, really powerful window in which you can completely customize your animation. So now we've got that going. I think for the follower, I want the text to actually not animate from left to right, but maybe inside out. So the center characters come in first, and then the other ones. So I think we're ready to add some particles. So adding particles is pretty easy. I add a particle emitter and a particle renderer. Now the emitter, and I'm going to connect those together, and then I'm going to add it to the merge 3D. So the emitter is where the particles come from, and the renderer is what draws the particles. And the reason why these are two separate elements on my timeline is because sometimes you want to put things in between those. So I might want to put turbulence or gravity or wind or something that's going to affect the way the particles move. So that's why those are separate, and then I pipe that into my 3D scene. So now I've got my particles and I've got everything right here. There's my particles. They're not doing anything yet because we actually haven't set them up, but they are there on the screen. So let's set the particles up. I'm going to select my particle emitter so that its controls appear on the right. You need to set the number, the lifespan, all kinds of stuff. Once you add variance though is when you're going to see them start to move. So now you can see the particles are moving. We're going to adjust the angle so that they face the camera. And here are my particles. Now just like text, I have to style the particles. I have to give them color and shape and all that other stuff. So I just go over to my Style tab, and I have options here. I can have the particle be a bitmap, so it can be a graphic. I can be spewing lots of graphics out of this particle emitter. It can be a polygon, a shape, a line, a brush stroke. In this case, we're just going to use a blob. And the blob just is a white fuzzy ball. We're going to give it a little color. Whoops. Just going to grab the color here, and we're just going to give that some color. All right, so now we've got lots of blobs flying out. You can also define what kind of an object they're going to be emitted from. In this case, it's set to a sphere, which I showed you, the little ball in the center of the screen. You could change this if you want to a cube, and then let's just make that really big so you could see that. All right, so there's my particles coming from a cube. You can see all of that happening in 3D space. But for the demonstration, what I'd like to do is show you how you can have particles being generated from a mesh, which is basically the particles can be generated from any other object. So we're going to use our text. So now let me just give you sort of an overhead view of that too. So you can see that the particles are coming out of the text. Now the important thing about this is that notice how I connected my text to two different objects. So my text is being merged into my 3D scene, but then I'm also using it as a source for my particles. So this is another example of where working with nodes is much easier than working with layers, because if I was working in a layered-based approach, I'd probably have to copy my text twice to use it for both of these activities. So with Fusion, you just connect the things to whatever you need to connect them to. You don't have to manage multiple copies of the same asset in your project, which means if I go and I change my text, it's going to change and be updated and reflected everywhere. Now, the last thing I want to do in this scene is I'm going to add a light. So let's just throw a light on there. And when I add the light, you see everything goes dark because I need to position the light. So I'm just going to position my light in 3D space. And as I rotate the light back and forth, you could see that it is affecting the text. I can change the color of my light. And this is, look at how interactive this is, right? I'm sitting here in Resolve, working with 3D text and titles all in real time. So this is getting to be pretty much what I like it to be. So when you're ready to go out to the edit page, you have to take all of this 3D stuff and put it back into 2D to get it back on the edit page. So I'm going to take this last node here on my toolbar, it's a renderer, and we're going to take the output of my 3D scene, which is that merge tool that we talked about earlier, and I'm going to add that to my media out, which goes back to the edit page. So that's my title. One really cool thing about Fusion, and this is unlike any other visual effects app, usually when you send a shot to visual effects, you're sending one shot, it goes to effects, you work on it, then you have to import it and bring it back into your timeline. Well, with Resolve, you have access to every single clip in your timeline, so you don't have to import, export, or send things anywhere. You just click between the different shots, and you can edit whatever shot and do effects on whatever shot you want without having to send it anywhere. Even better is that as you work on shots and you have different versions of effects, we track all of the different versions of your visual effects as you make them. So in that pop-up menu at the bottom, you can see I've got two versions of this effect, the one that we just built, and I have a finished version, so I'm going to load the finished version. And let me just reposition this so you can see it. turn my clips off. So this is a little more complicated, of course. We've spent some time building this title effect. You go back to the edit page, and this is what you see on the edit page. Now I've got it rendered out for you already, so we don't have to wait for it. And this is what the finished effect looks like. So beautiful 3D text with lights and particles. That was all built without ever having to leave your timeline and your edit page. Isn't that cool? Come on, it's, yay. All right, so you've never really had this kind of power in an editing application before. I mean, the complete integration of your editing and your visual effects is just amazing. So now I'm going to step over to talk about some of the edit and color features. We've added over 100 features that editors and colorists have specifically asked us for. So in addition to all the Fusion stuff, I've got some great new editing tools. So on the timeline here, you can see that I have multiple timelines open at once. I can switch back and forth. I can add additional timelines as I need them. So I'm going to add scene 2, I'm going to add scene 4, and then I can just switch back and forth. So these tab timelines can be reordered. I can just drag them and drop them in any order I want. We've also got stacked timelines. So I can view 2 timelines on top of each other, and if you have a higher res screen, you can view 3 or 4 timelines at a time. Editing between them, you can drag and drop, you can copy and paste. So if you're working on a large project with lots of timelines and you need to reference multiple timelines, you can see them all at the same time now, and you can work between them. So that's a really, really cool time-saving feature. All right, let's see how I'm doing on time. Pretty good. So back in the preferences, I'm going to cover some of the smaller things that I think are important. A lot of these features that we've added are things that are really just going to help your everyday workflow. The first is project loading. So typically in Davinci Resolve, we would load your project with all timelines, all color grades, all effects at the same time. And if you're working on a long project like a feature film or a documentary with thousands of clips and lots of timelines, that could take a while. So now we give you the option to turn that off, so we only load the items that you need when you need them, which makes opening large projects nearly instantaneous. We've also added project backups, and you can think of this as time machine for your projects. You can back up the project every so many minutes, hours, and days, and then we give you a graphical interface where you can browse through your history of projects and you can recall any version of your project at any time. In addition, we have live saving, so if you turn live save on, you never have to hit Command S. It will just always save as you go along. Under the keyboard mapping, we now let you map the keyboard on a page-by-page basis. So you can do global keyboard shortcuts, or you can do individual pages. So for example, if you're trying out Davinci Resolve for the first time and you're coming from Media Composer, you can set the Media Composer keyboard on the edit page. You can set the Pro Tools layout on the Fairlight Audio page. You can set the After Effects layout on the Fusion page if you want, so that you're able to get in and start working quickly, and you can create your own custom keyboard sets however you'd like. So that's a huge time saver, and it really just helps getting into this a lot easier. We've also added annotations, so if I go to a clip here, I can add some annotations, and I can say, all right, we need to make her face lighter. I can just draw on the screen, I can make a marker. The marker can be a duration or a single frame. This way, when I'm working in a collaborative workflow, the other people that I'm working with can see exactly what they need to do. They can see the feedback and the annotations. If you are collaborating on a network with multiple Resolve users, you can have an editor cutting in the timeline. You can have multiple colorists, multiple VFX artists, and a sound person all working on the same project at the same time. As the colorists and the VFX artists do their work, you'll get little update icons here in the timeline, so you can refresh the timeline and see their latest version of whatever work they're working on while you're cutting. So it's really the first completely integrated post-production solution for editing audio, color, and effects. All right, let's look at some title stuff. We've done a lot of work to add some great new titles to Davinci Resolve 15. So I'm going to open another scene here. First, I'm just going to drag the new Text Plus title tool in, and what you'll notice is that this is actually the Fusion title tool that I showed you earlier. So all of these great text controls that you get in Fusion and the high quality text rendering that we get from Fusion is right here on the edit page. So you can animate your keyframe or keyframe parameters just like I did on the Fusion page. All of those text tools are there. But even better is, now that we've got Fusion integrated, we can build 2D and 3D text tools. So we're going to ship with several dozen, probably about 4 dozen text tools to get you started. Let me just grab one here and drag it onto my timeline. This one is appropriately called Super Fancy Title. And I'm just going to replace this with the actor's name, Peter Shinkoda. And we're going to go and we're going to change the color of that. And I'm going to play that back. The first time you do, it's going to do a RAM cache. So it's building a RAM cache to preview that text for you. And then the next time you go to play that back, you'll play it back in real time. So instant titles. The cool thing about these titles is that we're giving you the templates and we're giving you the source projects from Fusion. So you can reverse engineer them, you can see how we built them, and then you can build your own. I'm going to switch to a title timeline so you can see some examples. Now, like I said, there's going to be over 40 or 50 or so of these templates, so this is just a few. You can customize the title, the text, the font, anything in here. We've got lower thirds. They're all animated, so really elegant and beautiful things here. This 3D cube could be a 3D rotating logo if you've got a corporate logo. You can change the parameters of the 3D objects, whether it's the text or the box that's swinging around. You can, of course, use glows and glints and everything that Fusion has to offer, and you can create templates. So you can create a template that only exposes the controls you want your editor to see, or you can leave it open so that you can go back to the Fusion page and see the entire composition and change whatever you want. So titling has just been hugely improved in Davinci Resolve 15. All right, let's look at subtitling. So we've also added subtitling to Davinci Resolve 15. Let me just change to my subtitle timeline. And I'm going to go and let me just grab the subtitle from my bin. I'm going to go grab it from the Finder. All right, so I have it in my folder here on the Finder. I have a subtitle file. This is just a standard SRT file. And I'm going to just drag that into my bin. So now I've got my subtitles. I drag that to the timeline. We create a brand new subtitle track. So let me just resize this so you can see. And the subtitles come in timecode order based on the timecode in the SRT file. So they're all placed exactly where they need to be. So it's all automatic. You still do have full control over them. And let me just turn this up a little. All right, so it looks like we don't have audio at the moment, but that's okay. So you can move these, you can reposition them. So let's say the subtitle track was done before the edit was locked. Something needs to be moved a little bit, you can do that. You can also double click on the subtitle. You see all of your subtitles here in the list. So you can go ahead and change something if the word was stowed instead of stored. You can adjust the track title for all of the subtitles, the movement, the position. When you're done with your subtitles, you can export them burned into the video. You can export them as metadata in a QuickTime file, as an SRT, as an HTML time text format file. So we give you subtitle from input to output. We give you all the tools you need to do subtitling and closed captioning. All right, I only have a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to switch to the color page. And on the color page, let me just resize some of these things. We have a new LUT browser. So we've always supported LUTs, of course, in Davinci Resolve. Let me switch to my color timeline. There it is. We've always supported LUTs in Davinci Resolve, but now with Davinci Resolve 15, you've got this great new LUT browser, so you can just hover over the LUTs, and you can add the LUTs as you want. So really easy way to add LUTs. We've also got new qualifier tools, so if I want to select this orange, I can go in and select this orange, and now you can actually go in and adjust these just by dragging the controls. It's direct control manipulation here in Resolve. I can adjust that. So previously you had to enter these values numerically, and now we just give you a visual way to do those, which is really handy. We've also given you new map finesse control tools. So there are more map finesse controls so you can get a really good qualification there going. Shared nodes. Let me apply a grade to this clip, and then I can create a shared node. So once that shared node is saved, I can go to the next clip, I can copy the grade, and you can see that this new clip has the shared node as well. It is locked by default, so you don't accidentally change it, so I'm going to unlock it. And then if you go and change the grade on one clip, it changes everywhere that that grade is used. So this is great if you're working on a documentary or a film where you've got a lot of shots from the same camera or the same angle. You can grade one and then they're all connected and you can grade them all simultaneously. All right, last thing before I turn it over to Mary to do some awesome audio work is some Resolve effects. We've done a lot of work with Resolve effects in this release. We've got some new revival tools, so we have automatic dirt removal, we have dust busting, so basically stuff to really make your images look better. Temporal and spatial noise reduction is all GPU accelerated and much, much faster than it was and much higher quality than it was before. We've also improved the performance of stability, so stabilizing footage is now over 10 times faster in the new version of Resolve than it was before. In addition, we've got some great new visual light effects, so aperture diffraction here I can just add, and you can see how that just adds some nice little aperture diffraction effects to it. I can go and add lens reflections, and these are real time, so you can see it's adding these blue bleeds here. Oops, let me just loop the clip. So all of that's real time. But my favorite one is the new patch replacer. And the patch replacer lets me basically clone an area of the image and put it somewhere else. So I'm going to take this space pod and I'm just going to put it over here. We're going to just make another copy of it. And we're using content-aware smart fill technology to do this. So I'm going to go into my tracker and we're just going to track this forward. And you know what? I did not do this on the first frame, so let me just make sure that's okay. That should be good. We're going to track this forward. You can see very quickly and very easily, I've just cloned my space pod. So that's just some of the over 100 or so new features in Resolve for editors and colorists. Some of the Fusion stuff. Mary's going to take you through Fairlight Audio. There's a free version of DaVinci Resolve. The $299 Studio version adds 3D. Some of the filters I showed you, like this clone tool, the temporal and spatial noise reduction. But Fusion and Fairlight come with both the free version and the Studio version. If you own a previous version of Resolve, the upgrade is free. There's no charge for it. You can download the public beta today. There's a What's New video on our website. There is also a 280-page What's New document on our website that you can download that goes over all the new features in depth, because we really just touched the tip of the iceberg here in this presentation.